Teachers' Voices.
As vozes do professor.
أصوات المعلمون.
La voix des enseignants.
Bien. Professores. Teachers' Voices.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Teachers' Voices. I am your host, educational researcher Nina Alonso, and this is the first of two episodes focused on the relevance of building solid foundations in children's learning and development. In this episode, we will hear stories about research programs and teaching practices that help vulnerable children from different contexts with the development of the most fundamental skills that children need to build educational progress. We will first hear from Professor Ricardo Sabates, who shares with us important insights about his work at REAL, a research group based at the University of Cambridge, with a strong focus on equipping out-of-school children in the Global South with basic numeracy, reading, and writing skills. We will also listen to Nadira, who teaches in a rural remote area of South Africa and highlights the need to fill the gaps in foundational skills of her secondary school students so they can have access to later stages of schooling and university. Finally, we will hear about the experience of Manu, a French primary school teacher who uses innovative project-based learning approaches to strengthen his students' motivation in learning how to read and write. We welcome Ricardo Sabates, who is Professor of Education and International Development in the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge and an active member of its research group on equal access to learning, the REAL Center. Hi, hello, Ricardo. How are you?
Fine, Nina. How are you?
Thanks so much for accepting my invitation.
It's a pleasure.
Ricardo, could you share with us some insights about the research that you have been doing about foundational skills?
We have been focusing mostly on the achievement of foundational skills for early stages of primary school. The research that I would like to draw more attention is one that we had the opportunity to collaborate with Professor Kwame Achampong from the Open University, as well as Professor Pauline Rose, my colleague at the REAL Center, and colleagues from RTI, which focus on the achievement of accelerated learning, and specifically in this accelerated learning is the proficiency of foundational skills in literacy and numeracy for out-of-school children in the northern regions of Ghana. This is a program which started over 25 years ago by an NGO called School for Life. And since they have built a wealth of evidence and expertise, as well as educational innovation to boost the foundational skills of children who hadn't had previously an opportunity to attend the schooling.
What does this kind of research show about the role of foundational literacy and numeracy in building better education systems?
Yeah, it's a really important question because the first thing that we need to think about this particular program is its innovative approach. So in building foundational skills, what this program, first and foremost, what they're doing is providing these skills in mother tongue or a local indigenous language. The program also starts with the grassroots, so the community gets together and they decide to be part of this program. They also decide which of the languages, because we have communities that are multilingual in nature in many regions of Ghana, and they decide which language they would like the program to take place. And also they provide a local facilitator who knows the context. The program is also offered in hours that enable the children to engage with their livelihood activities, if they have any, because these are children who are ages 8 to 14, 15, and many of these are supporting their household. So to think that they can go into a fixed 8 to 2 p.m. schedule every day is not easy for many of them. And finally, what they do is they take the first 3 years of primary school, where you build these skills from learning the foundations of phonics and letter identification and sound identification and numbers, to actually being able to read paragraph and comprehend the meaning of the paragraph and the concepts that are under this paragraph. It's very different to what you think is the formal school system that operates in this region. So in a way, it's very innovative. So it raises a question about, the system, building back a better system is, what do we mean by the system? Do we mean that the system has to be the same for all children, or do we enable these alternative education and innovations to operate to boost the foundational skills of children?
Ricardo, the kind of program that you have been researching about in Ghana reminds me about other accelerating learning interventions that are helping to pay attention to the individual needs of disadvantaged children who cannot follow the curriculum taught by the teacher in the classroom.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I was thinking a little bit about that, because also in the Real Center, we're working with Pratham Educational Foundation and also with the ASER Center, which is the research arm of Pratham. They're just outstanding researchers. And again, we have seen that one of the challenges that we have is that when children are not able to reach these foundational skills, and when the curriculum that the teachers are trying to teach is further, advanced to the capabilities and understanding of concepts of the children, that actually the curriculum is only able to be followed by 10% of the children in the classroom. So that's your top 10% performers. The rest haven't been able to achieve the foundational skills that are necessary to then be able to do a curriculum at primary 4 and primary 5 and primary 6. So if the teacher continues to teach to the curriculum, even with very interactive methods and child-centered or whatever you want to call it, but trying to reach that level of concept and understanding, is clearly that it will only reach a very small proportion of the children in the classroom. So the idea of teaching at the right level, as initially conceived by Pratham through their work, was to be able to teach the children at the level in which they are, to be able to boost their foundational skills, and therefore being able to help them to follow what the teachers are doing.
In a past episode of Teachers' Voices called What Can We Learn from Teachers Around the World, we had the opportunity of listening to the story of Armando from Mozambique, who told us how a similar kind of accelerated learning intervention takes place in practice.
We started this program with a huge promise that we would help children to improve their reading competencies and their arithmetic competencies in 50 days. And we were talking about children who have been to school for at least 4 years. So if in 4 years, they couldn't read, and we were promising to make them readers in 50 days, that was really a fearing challenge. So that fear was almost there from day 1 to day 2. But it disappeared after 2 days when we looked to the enthusiasm, when we looked to the way children were engaged, when we looked to the way children were motivated to participate. And essentially, teachers who were working with us, they were also enjoying what they were doing. So all the methodology, all the games, all the activities are not only enjoyable for children who are attending, but also for teachers who are facilitating. We are part of the enjoyment. We laugh, we dance, we make jokes, we run together, we sit in the ground, we clean the classroom together, we count like children, we make sticks and bundles, and we also play with sticks and bundles the same way children do. So that was the first step from where we lost that fear. But then, those aha moments, when someone reads the word tomate, tomati meaning tomatoes, for the first time. And he reads tomati. And the child suddenly moves, turns to the class and shows to the other children that I have read tomatoes. This word that I have just read, it has a meaning. And the meaning is tomato, the one that we know, the one that we touch every day at home. That's really, really encourageable, and that's really something that we enjoyed a lot.
Ricardo, I can imagine that the role of educators and teachers in the kind of interventions you are investigating is important. Could you tell me more about this issue?
So yes, the teacher has an important role to play in the classroom, but this work that the teachers are doing, which is incredibly important within the classroom, it's also within a system that is requiring certain incentives for the teachers. I wouldn't like to say just, the teacher should suddenly do teaching at the right level in every single classroom, because it is a much more complex process. So a lot of the work of the RISE program, which is the Research in Improving Systems of Education, try to think about what are these incentives that the system of education is giving so that the teachers are responding to these incentives. What are the incentives that are there for the parents? Because parents have also a choice of where they send their kids to school, what kind of education they want. So in a way, it is something that one has to think first and foremost, in addition to thinking about what is then the role of the teacher in the classroom.
What are the challenges of these programs? What has your recent research in Ghana shown?
Now, some of these programs, for example, the Complementary Basic Education Program in Ghana, which is the one that we've been referring, they are a 9-month accelerated learning program in mother tongue to enable the children to get proficient in these foundational skills and then make a transition into the formal education system. Now, while these programs are incredibly efficient at improving foundational skills, they take place in a very specific time period, and they're enabling children to get these skills. But after this time, the program doesn't continue. So some of the criticism is that you don't have a program such as your formal education system that takes children from preschool all the way to university. So sometimes they said, yes, it's easy for you to come and give a boost of skills and then think about the reintegration of these children. But if you do not allow these children to reintegrate, then it's just a boost of skills. So many of these complementary education programs, knowing that they have this short-term nature, they link with formal schooling to be able to make the transition. So in this way, what we've seen in the complementary basic education program is that about 80 to 85% of the children are able to make the transition and remain in a school for at least a year in terms of the time that we manage to follow these children, that we have information. And just one more point in our research that was very important is the fact that low attaining girls are likely to remain low achieving. So we found that boys who started the CBE program being low performers, they pretty much have almost the absence of foundational skills, were more likely to advance and progress to being proficient in foundational skills, but girls were less likely to do that. Girls were, remain as low achievers.
I understand that this gender component is an important concern. How is your work trying to understand this issue?
As part of our qualitative data collection methods, we had role play where the children were telling us about their experiences of education within the CBE program and what were their expectations that they were thinking about coming into the formal education system. And it's something really interesting because while we found that girls in general, in our interviews, they were a little bit more quiet, when we had the role play, they were able to tell us and to express themselves how they were feeling and how they were understanding the program. And indeed, some of the barriers that we have in terms of the household chores that they have to do at home, the time, the resources at home that they don't have availability, that actually are factors that are playing into this cycle of educational disadvantage that the low achieving girls find themselves. So yes, indeed, it is something that we're trying to unpack more to understand its complexity and be able to provide some more evidence base for those who are in charge of making decisions.
We just heard about teaching programs taking place in countries like Ghana and Mozambique, and research efforts that are studying how to best help children who don't have the foundational skills that they need to be able to make learning progress. As Ricardo mentioned about his research in Ghana, in some contexts, the complex relationship between languages spoken at home by teachers, by children, and the language of instruction and of educational assessment is an important issue to consider when thinking about building strong learning foundations. Dealing with this complex relationship between languages is a frequent requirement in the African continent, and we now visit a multilingual community in South Africa where we meet Nadira, a social science teacher who is very conscious about the need to revisit foundational skills even for older students, mainly when the language of instruction is not their mother tongue, so they get the learning levels needed to successfully face the requirements of upper secondary school.
Hi, Nina. How are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you, Nadira?
Fine, thanks, Nina. I'm so glad to connect with you all the way from sunny South Africa. I come from a small coastal town in a subtropical part of the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. However, I'm in a semi-rural area where I teach my learners that come from deep rural areas. So my school is actually a township school that serves the greater learners that come from a low socioeconomic background. And the area is called Umkababa, Area 35 in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. On a Monday to a Friday, I teach at a primary school. Learners are 8 to 15 years. And in the weekend, I touch base with high school learners. That means the learners that are 16 years to 19 years, where we give tutoring to them. But both the set of learners come from low socioeconomic backgrounds where they are very disadvantaged and underprivileged. So the onus lies on the teachers, the teaching force, to drive these learners to get into the world of work so that they can become comfortable in society and they become a good part in the greater life ahead of them. We have taken students that have come from basically living in mud homes, and we have given them tuitions on Saturday afternoons. And from these tuitions, we have enrolled these learners to write the exams. We had 3 of our learners that got a 90% aggregate. So when they went to university, the studies were given to them free of charge. They didn't have to pay a cent. And these students, their parents are illiterate. Most of my learners, because I come from KwaZulu-Natal, are Zulu-speaking learners, and their home tongue is isiZulu. What we find amongst our learners in the rural parts of our province is that they have a low self-esteem because they do not have that parental support, or they do not have that confidence that's built up from birth, if you may call it, because parents usually in my area, the parents go out to work in the urban areas and they leave these learners with their old grandparents. Hence, the learners are not very, very au fait when it comes to speaking English. So first and foremost, their English is their first additional language. Their home language is their mother tongue. So we try to give them confidence and build up their self-esteem in English, because at the tertiary institutes, all learning is done in English. So they become confident to speak and to do their work in English. So I tutor them and I give them opportunity to know how it is or what it means to be 4IR compatible, so that when they get to universities, which is in the urban areas, they are not left behind.
I asked Nadira if she could explain to me the tools or methods that she uses to help her other students catch up with foundational skills in English, also during recent COVID school closures.
I do a lot of visual learning with them. So I tape up things and I make them view it. And then after doing lots of viewing and critiquing, we do a lot of role playing where we imitate what we see, and we do a lot of mock interviews. As I said to you, we do learning on a Saturday. We've got a company called SAPI. Now, SAPI is international. SAPI is based in our area. So what we have done is we have liaised with SAPI, and SAPI has provided these learners with tablets. So when we meet with them, we give them the tablets to take home. And during COVID, they kept it with them for the duration. Yes, we do visit them in the lockdowns because we have some crisis problems that are really challenging for them. So if they do not get our support, they are left on their own to survive. So if they need any kind of support per se, where we need to get to them, yes, we do go to them because we do our protocols. We follow our protocols by all means. But our learners, they need to know that they have somebody, an adult that is caring over them. So yes, we are provided with all the means to get to them, and we get this kind of help from the NGOs in our area. And SAPI is one of them that always comes to our rescue.
Building and strengthening solid reading and writing skills is key, but it can be challenging for children whose families are less able to support their learning processes because of multiple reasons. As we have just heard, differences between languages spoken at home and at school can be one of them. In some Western contexts, it is increasingly common for teachers to work with children who speak a different language at home than the one their teachers teach them in. We now travel to Europe, landing in the south of France, where Manu is waiting for us, eager to share his experiences.
Hello Nina, bonjour. Ça va. Je suis content, très content de...
I'm very happy to be here to share a bit of my experience. Unfortunately, I cannot make it in English.
Malheureusement, je peux pas le faire en anglais.
I first asked Manu if he could paint a picture of his teaching context.
D'accord. Donc, je travaille dans ce qu'on appelle...
I work in what we call in France a REP school. REP is an acronym that stands for Priority Education Priority Network. I teach in the last years of primary education, which approximately corresponds to ages 9, 10 and 11. These are children with great difficulties. They come from community and family environments facing social, economic and cultural challenges.
Voilà. Et pour dire le dernier élément le plus important, je crois...
The last and most important feature of my context, for a teacher, for a practitioner, is that I work with children and families who have very little contact with the French language, and mainly very little contact with the written culture.
Très minime, et surtout, une culture...
So this is the kind of foundations we need to strengthen and work on the most.
Dans ce milieu-là. Voilà.
Manu mentions that he grew up in an environment similar to his students, so that when he passed the exam to become a teacher of the French school system, he knew that he wanted to work in a program working with students from less affluent environments. He wanted to highlight what he thinks is an important positive feature of his professional environment.
J'éprouve le besoin de toujours...
I feel the need to always think of innovative pedagogical ideas to be able to captivate these students.
Il faut que l'enfant mette du sens à ce qu'il fait.
The child must make sense of what he is doing, why he writes, why he reads. What is the meaning of all that? Because that the child does not want to write or read at home, so he arrives in the morning. We tell him, read that, write that. But he thinks, I don't want to do that. I don't care about this. So the child needs to know, why do we ask him those things? Because he needs to own his learning process.
Oui. Des exemples, je n'en manque pas.
Building teacher solidarity is very important in this context. This solidarity has allowed us to develop projects during these past years. Project-based learning in this kind of learning environment is particularly relevant.
I asked Manu if he could give me an example of how his project-based learning approach helps to build and strengthen his students' foundational skills.
We have built with our teacher colleagues a multitude of projects, so I have many examples, but there is one particular project that I have developed recently, which is very, very beautiful. The name of the project is Orchestra Class. The project was about learning how to play musical instruments that were very far from the students' cultures. The clarinet, the trumpet, the saxophone. Playing these instruments was unthinkable. The students had never seen them. They didn't even know what these instruments were. A key element of this project has to do with building strong reading and writing foundations. It has to do with building the connection of written culture and needs to learn how to read sheet music to be able to play an instrument, right? Well, at the beginning, it felt like making these kids read classic music sheets was impossible. However, for 2 years we learned, even me, I got started, we learned to read sheet music. And we finally finished by giving a concert at the Narbonne Theatre in front of several hundred adults. And it was a magical moment. A moment where I had tears in my eyes to see the children who had worked so hard for 2 years. And we all felt something. And more particularly, it contributed to everyone's growth, to all the students in my class, but for one sweet little girl who had the greatest difficulty in class to make her work, who was a live wire because she was hyperactive. Well, for her it was magic. What she had with the saxophone, from the moment she started with the instrument, the transformation was almost immediate. During the 2 years, she learned how to play the saxophone. The music teacher saw in her a special talent. She had never ever read sheet music in her life, never touched an instrument in her life, and yet I felt as a teacher that over the 2 years that I had this student, because I kept it for 2 years, that she also made great progress in traditional school subjects because, without her realizing, working on her saxophone every day or reading sheet music made her put some sense in the written culture.
Manu explains that thanks to this project, this child was given the opportunity to join a special class for children who need a special school schedule to be able to follow music studies.
So
it was a great satisfaction, and I think for her too. She felt very proud. For me, it was already enough of a reward to have this student. It was so magical to see this little girl, who I had to call back every day because she had become so passionate about her musical instrument. She made this extraordinary progress. And as the years have followed, she comes to visit me, to thank me, and mainly to keep me informed of how the classes are going. It has not been easy. She confesses to me that it's hard because she rubs shoulders with really academically high achievers. But all in all, her parents told me she's doing well. That's it. It's nice from time to time to be able to realize that a small project could bring a student so many things.
The story that Manu shared made me think about the centrality of motivation and self-esteem in children's learning, as we discussed on the 3rd episode of this podcast.
Self-confidence, yes, and also coming to class in peace is very important. I try to work with them on well-being. I make them meditate before starting classes. I always try to calm them down. I find often what's going on at home for them is not always very nice. There is a lot of noise. I try to explain to them that a good attitude in class and a good attitude in the classroom is very important because it develops the maximum confidence for oneself. I believe that is one of the major ingredients of making learning progresses for these pupils and for pupils in general, but especially for these pupils because they are convinced that they are not good when it is not true.
alors que ce n'est pas vrai. Thank you, Nina. Merci de m'avoir laissé cet espace de parole pour t'expliquer un petit peu mon expérience. And thank you a lot.
As we have just heard, investing in foundational skills is key, as they are the building blocks to other skills. These skills are fundamental in that they serve as a basic, the foundation, for supporting additional operations, tasks, and further learning progress. You have just listened to another episode of Teachers' Voices. If you want to learn more about Ricardo Sabates and the Real Center research, or about the teachers whose stories we shared, you can find more information in the show notes and on vault.expert. You can also listen to the RISE program podcast. RISE is research on improving systems of education. They offer interesting insights on the relevance of foundational skills.
Lehrerstimmen.
Voces de profesores. Teachers' voices.